Elizabeth Goldstein, the president of the Municipal Arts Society, and I want to welcome you to the Brendan Gill Prize ceremony. Tonight, we're here to honor conceptual artist Charles Gaines for his 2022 public art project, The American Manifest, Chapter 1. Thanks for joining us this evening. We're thrilled to have this intimate space to discuss and talk about and celebrate this extraordinary work. Before we begin, I'd like to say a few words of thanks to the many individuals who are part of bringing this evening together. First, I want to recognize the Gill family. Our jury chair, John Hayworth, will share a few more words about Brendan Gill later in the program. But on behalf of MAS, let us say that it's our honor to gather every year to honor Brendan Gill's legacy. The co-presenters of the American Manifest, Times Square Arts, Creative Time, and the Trust for Governor's Island, thank you all for coming here tonight and joining us in this celebration, but also bringing this incredible work to fruition. The board of the Municipal Arts Society, especially co-chair Richard Alcott, James LaForce, and Yoli Tang, who are all here this evening, I very much appreciate your joining us. I also want to thank our stellar MAS program staff, Genevieve Delorier and Genevieve Wagner, who conducted this year's awards process and who organized this evening's ceremony. And of course, I would be remiss not to mention our fabulous Phyllis Cohen, our longtime director of public art, who stewarded this award for its first 2 decades. And now I want to just share a little bit about how our evening will unfold. For those of you who haven't had a chance to experience American Manifest Chapter 1, we have a short video a little bit later to give you a little taste of this innovative and incredibly moving work of art that earned this year's recognition. Following the presentation of the award, Charles Gaines will be joined in an engaging conversation, I can promise you, with 2 members of the Gill Prize jury to explore his artistic process, influences, and the idea and concepts of the American Manifest. And at the end, there will be time for questions from all of you, our audience, and following the ceremony, we hope you will join us for the rest of the reception. Now I'd like to kick this evening's program off. It's always my incredible honor to introduce our next speaker, the chair of the Brendan Gill Prize jury, John Hayworth. John is a leader and a mentor in the arts and cultural sector for decades. Most recently, he served as the senior executive and director at the National Museum of American Indian here in New York. He also served as the Assistant Commissioner for Cultural Institutions at New York City Department of Cultural Affairs and taught for 14 years at NYU's Steinhardt. It would be an understatement to say that John thoroughly immerses himself in the art of our city. John must consume more theater, more music, more opera, more ballet, and more literature than any other single human in New York. He is truly our in-house cultural guru. Please help me welcome John Hayworth.
Those tall steps there. Well, thank you so much, Elizabeth. What a wonderful introduction you've given both to the program and also to me, and I appreciate that. I want to begin by saying just a few words about the man who inspired this auspicious prize. The longtime New Yorker, theater and architecture critic, author, former MAS president, and champion preservationist Brendan Gill was a man of extraordinary intelligence and sharp humor. His friend and successor at the New Yorker, the critic Paul Goldberger, said of Brendan Gill, he wrote what he believed with equal parts love and courage. He graced the Municipal Arts Society and New York City with his remarkable talents as a writer and an activist until his death in 1998. We are now at a quarter century mark since that. So it's a very special evening for many reasons. The Brendan Gill Prize was established in 1987 by friend and fellow Municipal Art Society board member Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, along with board members Helen Tucker and Margot Wellington. It is awarded annually to the creator of a specific work that best captures the energy, the vigor, and promotes and verb of New York City. It celebrates these exceptional contributions to the life of this great city and promotes New York as a source of inspiration to artists who live and work here and for artists throughout the world. I would like to thank my colleagues who serve on the Brendan Gill Prize jury, who joined me in the task of selecting tonight's honoree: Randall Borscheid, Raj Chatz, Gail Gregg, Laurie Beckelman, and two people that will be presenting and doing the interview later, Pat Cruz and Kasim Shepard, who will take the stage in just a moment. Our jury meetings are always both a great pleasure, but also a daunting challenge. Confronted with a vast array of works of art and expressions that arise from and are inspired by this great city in any single year, it can be overwhelming to consider which nominee best captures that spirit, that very essential New York quality that we were always looking for. For this year's prize, the jury was universally, across the board, all of us, unanimous in supporting the American Manifest Chapter 1, and in the heart of Times Square, the most innovative, the most moving, and the most essential cultural contribution in New York City in the year 2022. Forgive me, little eyes are going too. The groundbreaking The American Manifest is Charles Gaines' first public art installation, unfolding in 3 parts over the course of 2 years across 3 sites. The groundbreaking project features both performance and large-scale sculptural work. It tells a complicated story of the over 400-year settlement of the United States, focusing on the country's foundations of colonialism, racial capitalism, democracy, and the legacy of manifest destiny. And let me just tell you, having worked for 20 years at a neighbor institution, the National Museum of the American Indian, we confronted these very issues every day of my work life. So it's a very special honor to see the truth and resonance of this great work we're going to experience. Chapter 1 features a pioneering musical performance by Manifest 4, the Dred and Harriet Scott decision, and was coupled with Roots, a sculptural installation representing the complex root systems of the American sweet gum free once, which was populous throughout this region. A reminder that in terms of New York City's vibrancy and complex history and cultural contributions, I just want to add that we are surrounded by grand statements of public art right in this neighborhood. This really is the island in the center of the world. There's the Statue of Liberty and everything that that represents. There are the Daniel Chester French sculptures that are the 4 continents, with all the complexity of that at the Custom House. There was the Doug Starn and Mike Starn's public art that was part of a massive installation that was done in the South Ferry Station, and then it was really harmed by the Sandy storm. And now we flash forward to the work of Charles Gaines. It is my honor to present the Brendan Gill Prize to one of the foremost conceptual artists of the 21st century. Please welcome Charles Gaines. This is such an honor to meet you and be with you this evening, and even more of an honor to present you with this prize, and congratulations. Okay.
I just want to say a couple of words and thank a couple of people. I had to write them down, even though I've known them for like most of my life, because the stage fright will get me. But first of all, this is a project that was it was 10 to 12 years in the making. And New York City was the final destination, or at least it was the destination where it could be realized. And it would not have been realized if it had not been for these people. The first, Justin Ludwig at the Times, at the Creative Times. I got confused. I told you this was going to happen. Didn't I tell you? See, Justine, who resurrected the project from ashes, it's about 3 years ago. And she was joined by Gene Cooney, who's here tonight from Times Square Arts, who is responsible for making Chapter 1 possible of the entire project. And of course, this Meredith Johnson, who somehow created a miracle to get that huge machine, moving chains built, on Governor's Island. Now, you can actually see it from here. I thought we couldn't, but actually you can. And so I can't tell you how that, in fact, I can't tell you how much that is, in fact, that they made the impossible possible. So I'll never forget it. I'll never forget what they've done to make this project work. I also would like to thank Elizabeth Goldstein, the president, for making this award possible, along with Phyllis Cohen and the Brendan Gill Prize jury. I can't thank you enough. The check's in the mail. And I also want to thank Roxana Landaverde, my wife, for allowing me to come here, even though this is her birthday. She told me that I can have this day, but tomorrow, forget it. And finally, the Gaines family, who seems to follow me everywhere I go. This is my sister, Laurel, and her 3 daughters are here, and the one husband of one of my nieces. He's here hiding somewhere. I don't know where he is. Yeah, but I'm so glad that they're here to help me in sharing this honor. Again, thank you very much for this honor.
We're very excited to join Charles in conversation. Charles, you can stay up here with us after you deliver that. But first, we wanted to share a little bit, for those of you who haven't yet had the pleasure of experiencing this incredible work, a little video snippet. So can we cue that up?
The sculpture that I made for Times Square Arts is a piece called Roots. The Roots begins the project by bringing us to Times Square. It was installed to announce the first chapter of American Manifest, which is essentially a continuing narrative that explores and critiques the history of American capitalism and the relationship between that and American democracy. Early on, as a result of certain research that we did in the area, trying to find out what was the vegetation in the Times Square area before New York City was built. Particularly, we found that one common plant was the sweet gum tree. So we built a grid structure that functioned as the support for the trees. And then on a couple of amazing nights, we installed them. In addition to Roots, we also performed Manifestos 4. It's a project that involves the performance of the material that was produced from the Dred and Harry Scott trials. It involves also a performance of music that's realized by converting the letters from the trial court documents into musical notations and arranging it for an ensemble.
Through this multi-sided, multi-chapter exhibition, Charles is really trying to tackle really broad and complex issues and take us through his version of the American narrative. And I think that Times Square plays a really important role in telling that story as an emblem of modern-day capitalism and commerce, but it really represents much broader themes that run throughout our nation and our nation's founding, and Charles connects the dot between the two.
This project shows a decade-long commitment to an artist. It's such a powerful realization, something that is going to unfold over multiple iconic sites over multiple years to really speak holistically to the legacy of this nation.
It's a project that from its original proposal 8 years ago was just as relevant then as it is now. It's really a project that touches on the complicated history of America that continues to affect the lives and freedoms of every person in this country.
Even just listening to it from behind the screens, it gives me chills. Just to hear those voices and to hear so much about this. But we're really excited to delve in a little bit deeper to hear about your process and the inspiration and the relationship to the city. So I'm going to invite my colleague Pat, esteemed jury member, to start us off.
Thank you. This is so complicated, and I love the complexity of it, especially at this time when one looks at issues of capitalism and democracy, and the other pairing that is a little bit more parallel when you look at capitalism versus communism. So you're talking, or other forms of economic engagement, feudalism, all of the other things that have happened in terms of history. And then when you think of democracy, you usually think of it as opposed to its opposite, autocracy, monarchy, all of the things that we know have happened historically. But I think one of the things that's quite wonderful about your project is that it confronts us, which I think is what art should do. It confronts us with essentially the cover-ups that have taken place within the American society. And at a moment, which I cannot imagine us kind of returning to this moment, but it seems inevitable that we return to the erasure of history, so that we can look at the current Supreme Court and say, oh, how awful, how did it get to be so bad? And then you think back about Dred Scott and the determinations that were made by previous courts at previous times. I think one of the things that has been most erased in America has been our understanding of history. And one of the things that you are doing with your work is lifting the veil. It seems to me that the veil needs to be lifted by each one of us, whether we're looking in the mirror or whether we're in conversation with one another, whether we're making art or writing history. That is one of the things that we want to be able to do. So with that, my own manifesto, Charles, I want to ask you about yours, because I at the very beginning of meeting Mr. Gaines, I asked him about his process because I thought this was a new invention, the idea of taking words and setting it to music. And I thought, wow. And then he advised me that it was a Baroque invention. So whatever. This is America, and we reinvent everything and claim it all. So with that, talk a little bit about your inspiration and how you arrived at this determination at this moment.
Well, can you hear me? Yeah, as somebody I think already mentioned, that I hadn't been involved in making public work before this. So this was the first effort at it, and I was asked to contribute an idea for a project that was going to be installed in St. Louis, and this was years ago. This is 12, it could be 13 years ago actually, at this point, and I did. I've had made machines before. I mean, there's a machine that I made called Airplane Crash Clock, and there's another machine that is called Falling Rock. And what's essential to know about those machines is that it's heavily dependent upon foregrounding a sensible experience to whatever object-concept that is being undertaken by the work. And so the falling rock is really what it is. It's a rock, a 60-pound granite rock that falls about 12 feet and crashes through glass at metronomically, but you never know when it was going to crash through the glass. So there's this part of anticipation. It's part of the work, and it makes a lot of noise, and it actually shakes the foundation of the building, whatever building it's in. It rattles the floor. And an airplane crash clock is a machine that's organized, structured to. It's really set up as a tableau of a city, and it's a 12-foot-long object. And at one end, you would find plastic planes installed on a aluminum pole that rises about 9-10 feet, and so it's like a clock. It's like a cuckoo clock, except this cuckoo clock is run by a metronomic timing of a plane going across the cityscape, and then at a certain point stalling and crashing onto the tabletop. That moment of the crash is that the plane descends, and just as it's about to hit the table, there's a trapdoor that opens, and the plane goes underneath the tabletop, and on the other side of the trapdoor is a crash scene. And it sort of, at a certain couple of minutes, it repeats itself. It comes out and goes back to the starting position and repeats that process over and over again. And in both of these cases, the issue of the sensibility or the sentiment of the machine, or the issue of sense experience of the machine, provoked the sensibility that one would consider. For example, the airplane crash clock was created about 3 or 4 years before 9/11, and so before 9/11, nobody paid much attention to it, And then after 9/11, either I got this thing about how prescient I was, which I actually seek between you and I wasn't, or there was this critique that it's really a nonsense machine that would mean nothing had not been for the 9/11 event. But I couldn't show the machine for 4 years after 9/11. So it reaches this personal place of sentiment deeply in people. So I thought similarly in designing a piece for the St. Louis site to try to engage the history that surrounded the location where the machine was going to go, engage that as part of the experience of the machine, and frame that would then, by presenting it through this bigger-than-life experience, sense experience. The original machine, in that case, was designed to be 200 feet, 400 feet, I don't know. It was 400. It was designed to be 400 feet, which is like really ridiculous. I mean, it's only artists can think like that, right? So it was out of the realm of reality, but it really demonstrates how I was, being governed by creating this experience. And at the same time, there was another piece that was designed for that, and this was because in the same site in St. Louis, there was the courthouse where the Dred Scott trials took place. And so the intention was to write an opera, ultimately, using the system that you just described. But what ultimately happened, I thought I would write a piece, a kind of musical work that was not an opera, but would be something that could be used to write an opera, and this turned out to be Manifestos 4. And as you said, that this is the Manifestos 4 engaged as a subject the documents that came out of the second Dred Scott. Actually, the third trial. It came out of engaging the majority and minority opinion, and at the end there's Frederick Douglass's response to the Taney decision of the Dred Scott. So that what we saw in Times Square is derived directly in its early form from that experience, and it similarly deals with the effect of the sentiment around the physical and sensible experience of the work by utilizing sound and tone as the experiential process in relationship to the content that was dealt with.
That's amazing. I mean, machines, process, repetition, rhythm, these are things that those of us who have followed your work for a long time associate with, your visual output. And you talked about how this was originally conceived in the context of St. Louis, where the Dred Scott decision was originally concerning and handed down. But I'm very curious to hear about the role of place in this work. When it came to Times Square, how did the nuances of New York City, and I'm also curious to hear a little bit about Cincinnati too, where the next piece of the work will happen. How did the nuances and histories of the very specific places in which these works have been installed influence this process?
Yes, as I said, the piece is a site-specific piece. This is the moving chains. And as part of that site specificity, Manifestos 4 fits right in there. And so I can talk more about that part of it, because that's more appropriate here, where of course, writing the ensemble for the Dred Scott, using the Dred Scott trial text makes sense in St. Louis because that's where it took place. But as you know, the issues that you can interpret, the consequences of, it's one of the worst decisions in the history of American jurisprudence, extends nationally and probably internationally. So those issues, even though they were focused on being situated near the courthouse, somehow once they got into Times Square, took on a larger resonance, because the whole structure that made that particular manifestation of the application of law all had its origin in the structure and economic system that exists in New York and right there in Times Square.
Absolutely. I mean, I teach in one of my classes the history of New York City, and I always blow my students' minds when I tell them that prior to the Civil War, there was an active movement in New York City to secede along with the South, because our economy was so deeply tied in to insuring and shipping things that were made with enslaved labor. So there's really no, I think the choice for these northern cities, I mean, Cincinnati is an interesting marginal space in certain ways in terms of its history, but really implicating, the entire system, not just in a place like St. Louis, which has such an obvious connection to this history, but the extent to which, as Pat was mentioning earlier, we're right here in the shadow of Wall Street, and so much of this system, lifting the veil, as you mentioned, is really located right here. But you also deal with the ecology of the place with the sweet gum trees. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how the natural landscape inspired some of this?
What I try to work on in terms of these projects is through, rather than sort of a literal or direct connection to the subjects, I try to engage them, obliquely, like through metaphor. And so that's why the site specificity is important, that as just a standalone, if you can imagine the opera outside of a context or the trees outside of a context, the political critique would be hard to uncover. So it has to resonate and have a conversation with its environment, and it's through a metaphor. So I thought that, for example, the idea of trying to find out what the plant life was on the island of Manhattan before the city was built, I thought that, I could find some kind of form or structure that would help produce a metaphoric language that would not just talk about, that moment, but would stand for what happened subsequently in terms of the unfolding of the history of Manhattan. So in other words, with using the sweet gum tree, I wanted to talk about the entire history of the development of slave economy, coming out of Manhattan, and how that history, a part of that history is also this use of land and land appropriation, where the native communities were displaced as part of what we call the slave economy, but it's a larger construct of economy because it's really an economy built upon the exploitation of others. And we were talking about American capitalism, which in fact, struggles with the idea of exploited labor. In this case, that exploited labor is targeted based upon people's identity and origin. I mean, the idea of in other words, we move from just general idea of exploitation, where everybody is, is possibly can be victimized, but to the special place of exploitation, where even the exploited participate, when it comes to the economy. So I thought that through metaphor that could expand on that level, and turning the trees upside down, it was an intentional effort to sort of nurture that interpretation.
I'm wondering, because you have used the metaphor in your work, there's a part of it that might need to be unpacked by the people who are listening and hearing and seeing the work. And I'm wondering whether there is, because you've invoked in me an interest in going back and reading these texts and reading Frederick Douglass's response and understanding more fully what I only knew very remotely. I mean, as people are trying to block history from being taught in our schools, I won't name any governors from Florida, but there are those who are all over, of course, who want to use the same blocking. And my concern is that there is no realization that almost any student who was taught in America knows any of this. And that is a frightening reality, and it is a reality that is more hurtful than any revelation of the truth can ever be, because it allows us to perpetuate heinous crimes against humanity. And as long as we can identify as a part of humanity, and I hope that we still can for a while. I'm curious about whether or not there is any driving back in the work from the metaphor to the actual text that you have deployed musically and within the context of the metaphor.
Yeah, well, the metaphor is in the object that cites the text, but it's simply not, a literal, citation or link. Because my intention is to have it expand in all the. In other words, I can do this one image. Can I talk about the history of African American exploitation? I can talk about Native American exploitation. I can talk about the exploitation of women through sort of gender issues, and because they all share the same structure of exploitation. And so through the metaphor, I can do that. So it's, rather than just talking about, the individual problems that come from my own, the history of my own people. So that's the what I want for the metaphor. And the other thing is to bring to mind that these problems are rooted structurally in society, not just in the intentions and will of individuals, so that as an individual, one can be completely opposed to certain kinds of discriminatory practices, but then find themselves exploiting or utilizing a structure that perpetuates it. This issue with school and raising history is a good example of that because neither that governor in Florida nor the other people who want to burn books think they're exploiting or being part of a system, a structure whose intention is to discriminate and to exploit. They don't think, they say, for example, I'm totally in favor of black people eating in restaurants and not being, having to use the back door. But at the same time, they're totally in favor of banning books that deals with the issues of gender or race. And they don't think that they're participating in a racist or perpetuating a racist ideology. But what they tend to ignore is the fact that it is that very structure that situates in places that system of hierarchy that privileges them over others, where they think that they're just dealing with universal truth. So the metaphor is really important to realize that structure, and so what I try to show is that when, for example, when I take a text like the Dred Scott trials and convert the letters to music notation, you hear the music while reading the text, it's not lost on you that the music is not intentionally trying to create a particular interpretation of the text or a particular feeling of the text, because the music was arbitrarily constructed. Right. The letters in relationship to the subject is pretty accidental. It's pretty random, but nevertheless, people are driven to find meaning in the tones and sounds of the music as it relates to the text, as if I programmatically intended that. But I didn't. I mean, I didn't know what this thing was going to sound like beforehand. So the question is that then how can I draw this meaningful relationship? And it's simply because this sensible experience is combined to our knowledge system, and organized by a knowledge system, not a particular way of thinking, but a system that we use to organize the world. And we linked the two experiences to that, so so that particularly if we get a sense of the melancholy from the music, we attribute we place that sense, that experience on a particular phrase in the text to make it seem like we're intended to feel sad or even, happy or whatever. That was an intention. But actually, our cognitive system actually pulls those two things together and makes us feel about it as if it's natural. So this is to demonstrate that the idea that the structure, the linguistic and historical history structure that we've come to learn, creates a set of conditions by which certain feelings are attributed to certain experiences, and we think those feelings are a natural part of that experience. Those feelings are a natural part of the experience when they're actually constructed. Yeah. And so we can, therefore, it's, like smart people can also use and manipulate that, and I think that is what a lot of people who perpetuate racist, they draw on the feelings of individuals to make them think that the way you feel about a particular thing that may be highly discriminatory is actually not your fault, it's actually very natural.
It's so interesting, and it's amazing to hear you describe that process because it connects, hearing you describe it so much, in my mind, to some of your earlier work, thinking about rules-based systems, and you say the notes might be arbitrary, but they're rooted in this translation process that's very specific. But I wonder if we're going to open this up to questions from the audience in just a moment, so get those ready. But I'm curious if you could say a little bit more about music and performance in relation to some of your visual work. One of the things that's such a lovely thing about this particular award honoring Brendan Gill's legacy is that it's art in any format, in any medium, that's celebrating or drawing attention or lifting the veil, as Pat said, on some aspect of the physical environment of the city and the social experience and the history of the city. And you're now in this piece working in so many different forms all at the same time, with public installation, with music, with text, with performance, the role of sound also in moving chains too. If anyone has been underneath it, it's a pretty intense sonic experience in addition to a visual one. So I wonder if you could speak a little bit about the different formats and media that all come together in this work, the role of music and performance in particular, and how that relates to your visual practice.
Yes, we talked earlier about the fact that for years I was trained as a musician, and I spent some time, being a jazz drummer. But I stopped playing. I stopped doing that as a professional activity when I was very young, about the time I went to graduate school. And for years and years and years, I separated the fact. I still played, for fun or with people I know, but I always had that separated from my visual work, my artwork. I can see how they can come together, and it's really through our mutual friend Terry Atkins that I got an idea of how they can come together, and then that really actually led into the Manifesto series. Where I saw, in my particular case, I saw that what can be shared between the two experiences is a system that responsible for its production, and so that system it takes both visual, so that part of the music becomes drawings, and also theatrical form where the performance. It becomes a linked, connected experience, and so that was great because what for me it was pretty good because I recognize now the roots of that association goes way back to my first some of the first early work I did with which people call conceptual art. And so under the framework of conceptual art, you don't think in terms of particular genres. And you're not a painter, you're not a sculptor, you're not a printmaker, you're not a photographer, but you use all of those things. And in the early days of conceptual practice, they were used to actually critique the idea of art that was pretty much dominated by the idea of genres. The benefit is that you didn't have to think of art as being taking on a particular form or employing a language, a visual or otherwise language in any particular way. It gave you the license to move, or even to have to move in between what would be genres. So that, for example, musicians like Steve Reich, whose work was very influential, I really saw as performative work. You know, I mean, I saw that as being part of the history of performance art as well as the history of music. I knew a couple of photographers who didn't want to think of their work as photography, essentially, or being defined by the history of photography, and tried to emancipate themselves from that. And similarly, I found it not very difficult to think of using certain strategies of making that had not been traditionally identified with making art. So for example, my interest in systems and numbers, everybody kept telling me that's not art, that you'd have to be intuitive and expressive. And my work is being governed by a system, and that really was intended to take away my ability to be expressive in the production of a work. I had no trouble seeing that as a work of art, too, even though it violated certain standards in terms of how artworks were made. So I think that I owe that legacy to conceptual art, that I can combine performance and wall works, visual work, sculpture, and those kinds of disciplines.
Yeah, and hearing about drumming being a big part of the musical thing, it makes a lot of sense to me in the way in which rhythm and repetition and these structures and these rules-based systems can actually show the structural in what you're describing.
And mathematics. Yeah. I mean, the whole idea of the notion of two things. I mean, I think one of the incredible things that has happened, especially in America, not across the board, but I think that being a conceptual artist allows you to cross disciplines in ways that are not advanced or admired or put forward in our education system. So many young people coming into schools have to make a choice, even though they have multiple talents and have the skills to transect those different disciplines. They are put into a particular box that I think certainly restricts their creativity. But within the conceptual framework, you have the whole spectrum of being able to look at a thing, analyze it, and communicate it to us in a way that we can understand. I thought one of the things that you had said earlier about your work in terms of, and tell me if I'm wrong on this, but the idea of unpacking structural racism and how it exists within our society, and that your work is designed to reveal that. And I thought perhaps Bill Barr, our former attorney for Trump, declared that there was no such thing as structural racism that he understood. And I thought, really? Maybe he should know about your work, Charles. And we could also introduce him to Marvin Gaye, who kind of understood that, 40 years ago. What's going on comes to mind, including environmental disaster as well as soldiers coming home from wars and being mistreated and even killed here on American soil. I mean, I am so indebted to your work and the work of other artists who have dedicated themselves to revealing a truth that is not questioned. So thank you for that.
we would love to hear from you guys. If anybody has any questions, if they want to stand up and ask Charles a question about this work or about his process. We do have a mic that will rove, so please raise your hand if you have a question. Right here, we have one.
Hi, I was lucky
Wait for the mic so everyone can hear you. Here we go.
Hello, my name is Natalie, and I was lucky enough to be under your incredible installation on Governor's Island. And the sound is what really moved me beyond anything. So can you tell us about what that sound relates to and how it all came about? On the video that we saw, by the way, we just see the structure moving, but you don't hear the sound, which is really the most moving part of this piece that you did.
Well, as I said, having a very specific, intense, emotional, or sensible experience, I call it an emotional, sensible experience. Like having your senses stimulated can lead to an emotional experience. And that's what I'm interested in that in all my work. I mean, it's not to make the work seductive or pretty or anything like that. It's actually to employ sense experience, but I try to employ it as a concept, as a construct, because that, as the objects, have the capacity to function metaphorically. The reason we tend to read it metaphorically is because everything in the object exists in context. So apparently, hearing a lot of a loud noise wouldn't necessarily move you. I mean, it would like surprise you. Yeah. Well, no. What I'm saying is that if you just think of hearing a loud noise, there's lots of loud noises that wouldn't make you emotionally,
Yeah, but it was noise that was related to a context.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is.
I'm curious about
Yeah.
how you constructed.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is that what I do is I put together things that are unrelated. I don't know what you're going to do with that relationship because they are related arbitrarily. But there are these two elements in the machines. So in this case, the object itself is an abstract object. I mean, a lot of people say it looks like a bolt, and that's fine. But it's really an abstract form made up of these recognizable parts, like an assemblage. And so it's a machine, so it produces a sound. So there are this coming together of various senses that help drive an interpretation because of the location that it's in to that content that you're talking about. And because of that linkage that you make, I discovered, to my surprise, how emotional the sound becomes for people. But you're absolutely right that it's a content, but I didn't create that content. I took elements and put them together that expecting that people would link them. And in that linking process, I expected that it would drive an emotion because of those linkages. And that's how the metaphor works, because the metaphor is an abstract trope. It's not a literal trope. So it's always in relation to something else. It's an analogy. And the thing that makes metaphors meaningful is the analogy, not so much the elements that it's dealing with. That it's that you see that this is like that somehow means something and triggers it in relationship to the form that metaphor reaches you. If it's the voice or if it's the word, it's the same. And so I anticipate that what we're doing is we're creating our own metaphor in the experience and getting emotional about it. I think that this happens individually with different people. So, but what I'm saying is that what I am suggesting is that did not, like in programmatic music, the music becomes dramatic in the dramatic moments just before the death scene in the opera. There is this tremendous use of trombones, coming out of nowhere, right? So we can say the composer, used that programmatically, used the notation of the trombone in order to trigger certain feelings in you that plays along with the narrative. So I never get the chance to do that. I don't know how these various montage elements are going to interrelate, because I'm very much interested in removing my subjectivity. The removal of my subjectivity is very important, because this is how I can say that meanings like structural racism can be produced without you intending them to be produced. Yeah, so that's why I make that argument.
Thank you. That's so interesting and powerful. I'm curious though, looking forward, do you see more site-specific work in your future? I mean, maybe you could tell us a little bit about what's going to happen in Cincinnati, but how else do you see sort of sites and the site-specific nature of this particular piece and being in public and having a different sort of kind of engagement through both the performances, but then also this long-standing thing with Moving Chains on Governor's Island? Yeah, are we going to see more site-specific work from you in the future?
I never know. I mean, does anybody want to commission me? I never know when. Yeah, they've got somebody, but she's a relative. She doesn't count. So.
No, she's got a question.
I never know. It happens when opportunities happen, but I know how the only thing I do know is how I will deal with it.
Right.
Yeah.
Is there another question? Yes. Yeah, just speak right in.
Relevant to Cincinnati, are any of your New York partners going to join you to help facilitate or at least bridge the East Coast to the Midwest in conversation inspired by your work?
Yeah, I mean, this whole project was seen, as you remember from the title, it's seen as a structure that or experience that exists in 3 chapters. And so the identification of the agents who is tied to the project. That when it goes to Cincinnati, that's chapter 3. So it makes and keeps the connection with chapter 2, which is the chains, and chapter 1, which was Times Square.
But will Creative Time be there? Municipal Art Society? I mean, I think a big challenge we have is that the coasts aren't talking to the Midwest and vice versa, and it seems like this could be an opportunity to...
No, that was always, I mean, it was always planned to travel. Mm-hmm. So, because we're not talking simply about a New York narrative. All right? So, yeah, if they're not there, I'm going to go drag them. Yeah?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and I think that's such a powerful thing about the site-specific nature of this work, that it does talk not just to one place, but to how a place like New York embodies an entire culture and a whole history of structural racism that extended across the nation and across the world, but that it also speaks to other specific places in this network of historical connection. I think there was a question up here in the front.
Yeah, I said I can also. Hi, I'm the director of Creative Time, so I can answer your question a little bit more. So the title itself, the American Manifest, comes from Manifest Destiny, which is Western expansion, and so that's like hyper intentional that it is this conversation between, the East Coast and moving towards the Midwest. So that was very embedded in it, and so we work with a lot of different partners in the realization of our project, and so we're honored to continue working with Charles Gaines on that, but we also are working with a myriad of boots on the ground institutions that are helping drive this conversation also forward locally. So it's a multifaceted conversation. It's just not a New York-based organization that's dropping in and driving these conversations forward. These dialogues are already actively happening within that community, and this is an opportunity to just bring some of those dialogues to the fore.
And to create events as well, right? Where these conversations can, as Pat said at the beginning, a guiding metaphor, lifting the veil but also providing new ways of understanding history that'll lead to different kinds of conversations. I think we have time for one or two more questions. There's one over here.
Thank you. I followed your project for anticipating it for years, and amazing to see it. But what I wasn't ready for, and perhaps you've heard this before, but to cross the river, to have that experience being on a boat, and then to be within your piece, and the obvious, the feeling of being trapped briefly in that boat with the sounds. I did it with a friend visiting from Mobile, Alabama. She's 77 and the great-granddaughter of people from Gee's Bend, Alabama, the enslaved people. She was afraid to walk in. We took hands, we walked in slowly. She did not want to keep going. But I promised her, I told her about you and the spirit of love and history. Anyway, my question is, will there be a final home for your piece? Because I hope so much more people can experience it again and again. That's my question.
We don't know. At the moment, we don't have anything that in the works that would give us the idea that the piece is going to wind up permanently someplace. But there's some people. All I can say is some people who feel that eventually, some place is going to pick the piece up and make a permanent home for it. The part of the difficulty of it is that it's a site-specific work. So, like MoMA, it can't be at MoMA. So, so that just makes the choices, and it takes the whole process of finding a home. But there are a lot of people who think very positively that something will happen. So I'll just ride on that for a while.
And we'll give the final question to your family.
Family comes in. How old were you when you said to yourself and had no doubt, this is the path I want to take? I basically can't see anything else more for myself. This is it. This is my destiny. How would you say you were? And what made you make that decision?
You asked my sister.
This is where I will be.
It's funny because it wasn't something that really occurred to me until. There are two parts of this. One is that I found myself making art, and I went to an art high school and was in undergraduate school. I worked in an art department and so forth. And I found myself there pretty much because it seemed like a path that was laid out for me. There's nothing that I actually thought about. And in fact, in those days, I probably thought of myself as generally unconscious. And then when I was about to graduate from undergraduate school, somebody asked me what I was going to do what was I going to do for a living, so then the thought came to me. All right, but there's that part, what are you going to do with yourself? But the commitment to making art, that is quite a separate part, and I don't know how to understand or judge or make sense of that, or what the commitment and passion is, because like anybody who's an artist knows that it's the worst job in the world. It is brutal. It's a brutal way of living, and you don't do it because you think you're going to have a good time. So there is a commitment there. I can't at all explain that, but as a teacher, I would tell my students that who are interested in career and they want to be an artist, they want to be a famous artist, or they even choose. We're taught at California Institute of the Arts. They came there because it would be a lead-in into a major art career. I would tell them that if that's a major reason for you doing it, the first downturn, you're going to leave. So, you're using you're basing this desire for a career on the wrong terms. That it's just simply something that you can't help but to do, and whether you have a career or not. So that is it. I mean, I know that because I got beaten up so much trying to be an artist, that I wasn't in it for a career. But I don't, so that part I can't explain, but I can tell you how, because somebody told me, what are you going to do, for the rest of your life, you better plan. And so that's why I decided to go to graduate school.
Well, thank you for sticking with it.
Well, I'll say that we're happy for your purpose. We're happy for your purpose, Uncle. We're happy for your purpose.
This work is so meaningful, and thank you so much for sharing it with us and for being here with us. And yeah, thank you. Thank you all for being here, and I'm going to pass the mic to Elizabeth.
Could everyone please help me thank Charles Gaines for this extraordinary conversation and this extraordinary piece of art. And a special thank you to John and to Pat and to Kasim for this wonderful conversation as well. I hope that all of you will make a special point, if you haven't already been out to Moving Chains, to please go see it. It's going to be there until the end of October. Please correct me if I'm wrong. That's good. Okay, I'm getting thumbs up from the Governor's Island folks, so I think that's right. It is absolutely worth seeing. And I also urge you to take the on-demand audio tour, River Years, that Black Gotham Experience has produced for the exhibition as well. That's really an extraordinary enhancer of the experience. So I hope you will join us to drink and celebrate and have some food. And thank you all for joining us. We're so thrilled to have you.